What's up, guys? Coach Matt here. I've got a bunch of training footage from this past week that I want to share with you, and I just want to go over what my training looks like day to day, kind of a weekly basis, what kind of program I run, and some of my thoughts on what works for me in terms of programming, and then also what doesn't work for me, what might be different from what you're used to seeing in a program. Editing this video, I realized I didn't take too much footage of my strongman training, and by didn't take too much footage, I mean I didn't take any footage at all, so sorry about that. What you're going to be seeing is just all of my day-to-day strength-based programming. So if the video title wasn't obvious enough, I'm currently running Barbell Medicine's 12-week program, and out of respect for them, because it is a paid-for program, I'm not going to go too into depth with the details of the program. I will give you kind of the general overview of what it is I do each week. And if you're kind of on the fence of purchasing that program, I can just go ahead and tell you it's well worth the purchase. You're not going to regret anything on that. Now, in combination with the Barbell Medicine program, I also run what I'm going to call Lions Den Strongman, which is basically Coach Joey's just programming for myself and a whole bunch of other members for an upcoming Strongman competition, the Beast of Bloomsburg. And that's twice a week on top of the Barbell Medicine program. So one of those days is during my training days, and then one of those days I actually use one of the Barbell Medicine's off days just to focus in on strongman. So with the base Barbell Medicine program, I'm training 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then adding in the strongman on top of that, I've got an additional training slot on Tuesday. So Tuesday's almost a 2-a-day. And on Saturday, which is technically an off day, I solely do strongman. So essentially it pans out to 5 training days a week. One of those days is basically a 2-a-day. And then I've also got 2 rest days a week. For my main training days on the Barbell Medicine program, I'm always doing 2 strength movements out of the big 4. So squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press. Squat and bench are paired together, and then deadlift and press are paired together. And the first 2 days of the week will always be the competition versions of those lifts. So competition version basically just means you can gear up with everything you'd be allowed to use in a powerlifting meet. For me, that's wrist wraps, belt, knee sleeves, and my ollie shoes. And then for the next 2 days of the week, the pattern stays the same, squat and benching together, and deadlift and overhead press are together, but it'll be variations thereof. So it could be anything from pause variations to tempos to overload work like slingshot bench or block pulls, anything that closely mimics the competition lifts. These movements I tend to avoid wearing all of my supportive gear, really just from a regulating intensity standpoint, not so much from a I think I'm becoming reliant on the supportive gear standpoint. Now, if I truly follow Barbell Medicine's program, I'd do a 3rd supplemental lift, usually another close variation, but with the intensity a bit lower and the volume a bit higher. But instead, since I'm focusing on learning strongman, I usually tend to substitute out those 3rd supplemental movements for something strongman related. And I don't really have a pattern with that. It can be very random, whatever I choose to do on those days, so I give myself a bit of liberty with that. So if it wasn't blatantly clear already by the type of programming I'm following, all of my goals for myself revolve around strength. I love making progress in the main barbell movements, and recently picking up strongman has been super fun for me, so both of those are my big goals. Barbell movements, progressing them up in weights, and learning strongman as much as possible. In terms of aesthetic goals, since that is what a lot of people kind of get into lifting for, and that's definitely what I got into lifting with. I wanted to be, that ripped dude with the big biceps, but I've kind of gotten away from that recently. I think the more you get into lifting, the more you learn that comes a bit of a toxic mentality to have. Do think strength training has the same pitfall, but not so much to an obsessive degree. So I do like progressing myself in the main barbell movements more than I like shooting for aesthetic goals. Now, that's not to say I'm just going to let myself balloon up and get the power belly. I do make sure I don't put on an unneeded amount of body fat, but other than that, I'm not super worried about aesthetics. All of my training is geared towards making me stronger. So some things I love about this programming would first be, of course, the frequency of it. So I'm almost benching 3 days a week, squatting 2 to 3 days a week, deadlifting 2 days a week, and pressing 2 days a week. And this has improved my training dramatically. So I'm not really a big fan of the fear-mongering of overtraining and threats of injury and things like, oh, you can only deadlift once a week because it's going to fry your CNS. I think that's kind of holding back some of the strength community as a whole, and I am thankful to see a lot more people moving in the direction of increased frequency, especially things like squatting and deadlifting, where the common consensus is kind of fear of lower back pain or getting injured while doing these. So I am happy to see the community kind of moving towards this increased frequency. it's definitely improved my lifts overall, as I said, dramatically. Now, in conjunction with this frequency, another thing people might raise an eyebrow about with my programming, and you might have been looking for it in the footage, is I don't really do too much accessory work on top of my main lifts. So if you're thinking from a strength point and you're thinking from a training economy standpoint, there's honestly little to no reason to be doing any sort of accessory movement that's not a variation of the main movements. Now, I'm not saying accessory movements are bad or anything like that, especially if you're thinking from a hypertrophy standpoint. I'd be able to argue for them a lot more. But if you were to come up for me asking for a program, you're saying I want to increase my squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press, the best things for that is doing the squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press. Any sort of accessory work I'm going to give you is just going to be a variation thereof, and there's no real reason to be wasting a bit of energy on these smaller movements when you could just be doing the movement itself that you want to improve. In terms of my strongman training, that's really just all about skill acquisition, so I'm not really too worried about gaining strength with those movements. I'm using kind of my squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press to gain the strength, but I want to get used to moving the heavy weights and moving them with a good amount of technique, even though I've just started learning. So really just skill acquisition in terms of the type of training I do for strongman. And for strongman, obviously I'm training across the board, all the events. Right now I'm focused in on a select few just because I do have a competition coming up in 2 months here, but once that's over with, I'll go back to kind of training everything, make sure I'm well-rounded, and then kind of continue the goal of competition comes up, I'll train for those select events. While I'm not in competition, make sure I'm well-rounded with all of the events. So I know that's not every bit of piece of information I could possibly give you about my programming, but I think that's a pretty good general overview of what I do day to day, week to week. If you have any further comments on any sort of specifics with my training, I'll be happy to answer them in the comments down below, so just shoot me a comment. Other than that, guys, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for checking out what I do each day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.